Say we get into the cage and through the security doors there, and down the elevator we can't move, and past the guards with the guns, and into the vault we can't open.
Without being seen by the cameras.
Oh, yeah, sorry, I forgot to mention that.
Yeah, well, say we do all that. We're just supposed to walk out of there with $150 million in cash on us without getting stopped?
Yeah.
Best there is, the best there was, and the best there ever will be.
I need the best.
I had the best words.
Well, I'm the best there is.
The best. We the best.
Have a chance to be the best of the best.
You are now listening to Best of the Best, presented by Radar Studios. Starring two guys who use their middle initial to sound cool. Here are your hosts, Neal E. Fisher and Mark P. Smith.
So over the weekend, I saw this movie. I saw two movies that I enjoyed. The first one is available on Netflix right now. It's called The Invitation. Have you seen that?
No, I have not.
So that one was really good. Both of these movies I watched revolve around a dinner party of sorts. The Invitation, don't want to give too much away, but it's basically about a guy who, played by Logan Marshall Green. He kind of looks like a budget Tom Hardy. Great actor, though. Less grunting than Tom Hardy. But he goes to the house that he used to live with his ex-wife in, to a dinner party with some old friends he hasn't seen in a long time. And it's just very awkward on purpose. So it's one of those dinner parties where you're interested in seeing what happens, but it's also very awkward. And the other film I saw was a very, very low-budget film that was well done, called Coherence, also revolving around a dinner party, but it was on the eve of a comet passing over. And let's just say the comet passing over affected time and everyone else. And the most fascinating thing about that movie was most of it was improv. So they gave each character a note card each day of the 5 days of filming, and everyone's motivations were changed. It starred Nicholas Brendan from Buffy. So great films, though. Invitation's available on Netflix right now. And then Coherence, I believe you have to stream or rent.
Is that, did you watch that through one of your film club or whatever, your Shake Boys?
Shake Boys,
movie
yeah.
night things?
Yeah, that was one of our movie night. It was actually my movie night. So I put up 4 pairs of films, and The Invitation, Coherence, pair 1, which was Sinner Party Saturday. So
did you have the other movie in the mix, the John C. Reilly movie with what's his name, the guy from Django Unchained too?
The one from Django Unchained.
You know what I'm talking about?
No.
The one we were talking about the other day, where the two parents get together and they have a dinner. There's like they have a
Carnage.
Dinner. Carnage, yes.
Yeah, the Roman Polanski movie.
Did you put that in your?
No, I didn't. Well, not all of my polls were dinner party related. Like I did, a lot of them were horror related or cult related. So I did The Invitation, Coherence. I did Kill List and The Sacrament. I did House of the Devil, and another one I can't think off the top of my head.
House of the Devil is good.
Yeah, I do enjoy House of the Devil. So it's just a little club. Every week or almost every week, a different person puts up 4 pairs of films that have a connection to each other. So, 2 films, and then everyone votes on it, and we kind of enjoy them. A little bit of a round table of sorts, sort of a Algonquin club, if you will. Algonquin round table. Here are my picks: Coherence, The Invitation, Kill List, The Void, The Autopsy of Jane Doe, The Hallow, and The Sacrament, and Sound of My Voice. So those are my 4 pairs right there. Definitely worth a look for if you guys looking for some recommendations. How was your holiday weekend?
It was fine. We went to the zoo, which we had never been to before, and it was okay.
Right? Just went to a zoo, saw some animals.
Yeah, it was fine, and pretty low key though. Other than that, it was a lot of hanging around this town on the corner. I've been. All right.
Your wife likes Counting Crows, right?
Yeah, but I don't know. If
Probably
that's
the
that
only
song.
thing that I disagree with her on,
she
from what I've known about
She
her.
likes the good songs though. She doesn't like any of their terrible like accidentally in love, whatever. They're like all those like terrible, you know.
Does she like his hair?
No.
Okay.
I don't think so.
I don't know if anyone likes his hair.
I think when she discovered it was fake. On top of the fact that it's so gross looking, that was the end of that.
What about the black Counting Crows? If it was, hey little baby, let me light your candle, 'cause mama I accidentally in love.
That was the worst joke ever.
Yeah, that's a bad joke.
So today we're finishing up the third part of our 3-part series on directors that we're focusing on, directors that were primarily
That we're focusing on.
had their focusing, had their comeuppance in the 90s. And today we're talking about Steven Soderbergh. I like to pronounce the H at
Mr.
the end.
Soderbergh, and I take my shirt off. I could do a better impression, but that's okay.
Yeah, I thought in the end we tossed around a few names, and we thought with his body of work and his connection to that genre or to that era, to the sort of 90s independent film scene, was pretty prevalent. So we thought we'd have a little discussion about Mr. Soderbergh.
Yeah, I think Steven Soderbergh, is right in that list of people that we talked about the last 2 episodes in the 90s. We've talked about David Fincher, P.T. Anderson sort of coming middle to late of the 90s, and we kind of maybe have done this in a reverse order, but Soderbergh really, 1989 and up is sort of where he made his entrance. I think the thing, we're going to try to, keep this streamlined. We don't want to, go for 2 hours like David Fincher. And today you can actually hear me, which is good. So we didn't screw that up. So it'll be a nice listen. But the thing about Soderbergh, I think that's so fascinating is he's a filmmaker in the way that Madonna is a pop star, where he continually reinvents himself. He has these spurts where he'll do a certain type of movie. This is the only podcast, folks, film related, that compares Steven Soderbergh to Madonna. And he reinvents himself and, changes his style. Maybe he does like a palate cleanser. He'll go and produce something. He'll maybe only write something, only DP something. So he's very interesting in that respect. And it all starts with Sex, Lies, and Videotape.
Yeah, I mean, just to give you a little bit of a flavor of what you're dealing with when you're watching a Soderbergh film. One, it's a little hard to pinpoint it in if you're looking at his films from 1989 on to now, because I feel like he's, like you said, he's been his style has evolved, but the stories are all very personal. Like I feel like when I look at all these stories, there's like a real sort of intimate portrayal of said people.
Yeah.
There's a few exceptions that maybe that isn't the case, but for the most part, I feel like there's more of and I think that kind of comes from the fact that he's sort of honed in on that cinema verite, documentary-esque, especially like handheld kind of style. That's kind of his thing now. And I feel like that, his early experimental films after Sex, Lies, and Videotape, like Kafka and even that film Bubble, which came after that was later. But like, there's a real, seems to have like a real need to experiment, to continue to like, not be like the coolest guy to do it or push the envelope in a way that's like, hey, but like to just tell a story in a new way, almost, almost every other movie, he changes something, so.
Well, on that note, some films, like Mark was saying, he has sort of a more artistic viewpoint on those films. So some films are a little more experimental, less commercial, a little bit more like of a gamble. And so he has a lot of those films, like Kafka, like Bubble. One thing that he's done many times that, a lot of big studio directors don't do is he does movies that either have a lead that doesn't have any acting experience, does an entire film with people with no acting experience, and he's almost experimenting in that way. So that is one of the things that makes him very interesting. And just a quick example, so the film Bubble, which we'll talk about, was filmed in a town in real people's homes, and the actual people played the characters. So the people had no acting experience. Then you go to something like Haywire with Gina Carano, an MMA star. She'd never acted before, but what he did is surrounded her with really great actors like Michael Douglas and Michael Fassbender and people like that. So that was an interesting experiment right there. And then, he had a film Schizopolis, which we'll talk about, which he himself was the lead character in. So I feel like, comparing him to Fincher and P.T. Anderson, just for the sake of our first
Or
director.
the Girlfriend Experience, too.
All right, that's what I meant. The Girlfriend Experience, with Sasha Grey, yes. Who's a porn star. And so what's interesting to compare him to P.T. Anderson is P.T. Anderson's trajectory is very pointed, and it has a certain path. David Fincher's trajectory, he's a big studio director who utilizes visual effects, like we said, a more studio director. But where Soderbergh is interesting is he really could play in any pond that he wants to play in. If he wants to play in a super low budget indie, it's fine. If he wants to do a big budget studio trilogy, he's fine. Or if he wants to do a middle of the ground film, he's fine. So that's what makes him very interesting. And he's a triple threat. I mean, he's a writer, a director. He's also his own DP many of the times.
Triple threat.
Actually, a quadruple and an editor.
Yeah.
So I think that comes from his indie days. That comes from him, being of the same cloth as a Richard Linklater, David Fincher. I mean, he worked his way up. He knows all the different positions, and that has really sort of cemented him as a director.
What I find interesting, too, on that same note is that he's still doing it. He's still doing it now.
Yeah.
I know that there's a necessity for a lot of these filmmakers coming up to be their own DP, be their own or be their own editor, and whatnot, be their own producer. But now that he's had a lot of success with a lot of films, both like box office and critical acclaim, you would think he would okay, I'm going to have my corral of filmmakers I'm going to work with, but he still wants to put his his editing fingerprint on everything, his cinematography. You know what I mean? Like he still feels the need to do all those jobs, and I think that's interesting. And maybe it's something that's it's just innate in him that he can't sort of separate from, and and maybe he has a real inability to explain what he wants out of things, and he just feels like he needs to hold the camera and
Yeah, and someone we've talked about a lot here, someone I feel a kinship to is a Rob Reiner, who Rob Reiner's background in every movie, I think, and I feel because of his dad, is comedy. So he comes at everything from a comedic angle, or at least make sure that there's a comedic angle there, but he does so many different genres, as we've talked about, psychological horror, courtroom drama, mockumentary, things like that. So he's very versatile. Steven Soderbergh's the same way. I feel like every movie he comes from from an artistic, experimental aspect, because there's a lot of very symbolic setups, shots, points of view in these movies. So even doing something like Magic Mike, there's a lot of great scenes and scene structure in those films, even though they're kind of written off as whether it's female entertainment is what they called it, or pulp or fluff or whatever.
Right.
So I feel like he's similar to Rob Reiner in that respect, where, 1 year he could do Ocean's 11, which is, basically the most studio type picture you can make. I mean, it was made originally in the heyday with the Rat Pack, or maybe he goes off and does like a Logan Lucky, or like a movie similar to The Informant, which is such a weird movie that gets widespread release. A great movie, but he's just versatile in that way, where I think he can play wherever he wants, pretty much.
Yeah, and I think that to that note, just to add a little bit to it too, is like he will bring a sort of independent film sensibility to sorry, Neal. Neal was about to drink the water I had, and I wasn't sure if he
that was your water bottle.
But no, like I was saying, I feel like he brings an independent film sort of sensibility to even the big budget movies.
Right.
You know what I mean? Where they're not, they do have like a sort of handmade, in a lot of ways, a kind of handmade appeal, and kind of a, like a looseness. I think that's interesting. It kind of breaks down the sort of Hollywood film aesthetic, to a degree that I think is, and I think he's one of these guys like Doug Lyman or those guys in that sort of era that have ushered in the sort of handheld, style. But most people use it just because it's a budgetary or whatever, or they just feel like, they don't want to plan out a shot, or they're not like, some people aren't that creative. Like you got a guy like Spielberg who has like a, 3 framings in one shot or something, where these guys, it's actually like, with Soderbergh and those guys, it's really like really specific and useful, and not just like, we're just doing it to do it. So
yeah, I've seen videos as sort of a final note where, you look at big budget studio movies or just basic movies in general, and every scene, and it's not a bad thing, but, every scene will start out, with your establishing shot. Then you'll go into a wide shot to see the entire action. Then you get the option of cutting into, medium shots, over the shoulder, close-ups, just a bunch of different coverage. But Soderbergh, what he does, what's interesting, and even in Ocean's 11, I mean, he takes an independent sensibility to it, where there's a scene, I saw a video essay online about how he uses his sensibility. There's a scene in Ocean's 11 when George Clooney goes to, I think, close out his bank account, and the banker says something like, what did you do for a living? He says, I was a high school basketball coach. And he said, you did really well for yourself. What's interesting about that shot, though, is the video essay was talking about how, if this was a normal movie, you'd see an establishing of the bank. You'd go inside. You'd see George Clooney walk all the way up to the banker. You'd see the banker. You'd see George Clooney. Then you go over the shoulder to the banker, over the shoulder to George Clooney while they're talking back and forth. Then a close-up, and maybe an insert of his hand taking the check or whatever. What Soderbergh does, he just has the camera in one spot. It's looking up. You don't even see the banker. You see his hand. You see George Clooney walk in, not with his face, though. You just see sort of his suit. He sits down, and then the whole scene takes place from that one shot, looking at George Clooney, and that's it. You don't even see anything to do with the banker. It's all focused on Clooney. And that's sort of a very independent sensibility to it. I mean, he did it for certain reasons, but if that was a smaller budgeted movie, maybe they don't have the bank location that long. Maybe the bank wouldn't let him shoot in one direction because it was open. So, in that case, maybe he would have just shot one angle and made it the whole scene in one angle like that. But in a big budget movie, that's something you normally don't have. And it's very evident in a lot of the movies that he makes that he's shooting him in a way which come from that independent sensibility. And I think that makes it really unique.
Yeah, I think, he's obviously making a choice with everything aesthetically and style-wise that he does. So starting off, this is another director with a lot of films. He's got 40-plus films just as a director.
Yeah, this is going to be the sort of the greatest hits. Imagine if it's 2 a.m., you're watching an infomercial, and they have Motown classics, and those titles are just going to scroll down the TV, and some of them will be like yellow. So we're just going to talk about the yellow ones, but we'll still scroll through the white ones.
Yeah, so we'll miss, I'm sure we'll miss a film that you really like of his, but if you're already a Soderbergh fan, you don't need to be explained to, so.
Right.
We can't start off without talking about Sex, Lies, and Videotape from 1989. It's been a long time since I've seen this movie, so it's a little foggy to me, and I didn't have time to rewatch it before we did this episode, but it's important. It's important in the sense that, again, I'll say personally, it's not one of my favorite of his movies, but it's important in the greater sense, in the greater sort of genre, sort of the 90s independent film genre is what I'm trying to say.
Right.
Because it's always been always kind of my theory, and I think a lot of people like film historians and people that really do this hardcore, that this film maybe isn't the single film that like kind of ushered in the 90s independent film movement, but it certainly was a big part of it,
Yeah, it's at the table.
Kickstarting the Tarantinos, and like we said, the Paul Thomas Anderson,
Linklaters. Yeah.
So it's really important at that point. In this point, I think another impressive thing about Sex, Lies, and Videotape is how mature the material is. How and I don't just mean like it's sexually like. I mean it is. There is some of that, but it's a guy. I mean this is a guy that basically wrote this script on a legal pad, and he was like 25 years old and made this film. And I just think like when you watch this film, it looks like a very seasoned filmmaker, as far as subject matter goes and direction, made this film. So that's,
And he won the Palme d'Or. He's like the youngest guy to win the Palme d'Or at Cannes, which is a great trivia fact for those that I know that are listening that like trivia.
yeah.
That's a pretty tall feat to win that.
Yeah, exactly.
At Cannes. And it says the budget was only $1.2 million. Probably could do some more research. Probably wasn't that much. But back then, still a low amount of money. What's funny about this too is, you have your three leads, James Spader, Andy McDowell, and Peter Gallagher. Peter Gallagher always putting in good performances is kind of like he usually plays an asshole, and he's very, very good at it. And sometimes he plays, other characters than that, but he's great in this movie. Andy McDowell is sort of, right in that prime Andy McDowell era, like right before the 90s hit or Groundhog Day and all that. And she's very innocent in this. But then James Spader, I was just going to say his career is very interesting because he was in Pretty in Pink, kind of went up to, Less Than Zero, Sex, Lies, and Videotape, had a little bit of a drop off, comes back with Crash and a couple other movies there in the mid 90s, then has another drop off, and then comes back even bigger with Boston Legal, or The Practice, Boston Legal, and then another drop off, nice cameo in The Office, great in Lincoln, and now he's huge with Blacklist. So he's an interesting actor because it's so funny. Sometimes when he plays up his James Spader-ness, he can almost get Christopher Walken-y. Because, if that makes sense, where, when Christopher Walken
Especially now that he's older.
Yeah, now that he's older. So when Christopher Walken wants to be Christopher Walken, the caricature, he can do it. He can turn it on. But James Spader, I think, kind of, led up into that. But I think Soderbergh really captures him well in this film, and maybe a little bit of himself in the role of sort of this filmmaker of very personal stories.
Yeah, and I think, he went from basically making music videos and sort of concert videos and being a freelance editor, and then basically wrote and made this film. So it's interesting. That's a hard feat to do because he doesn't have any Hollywood. He didn't have any Hollywood connection. He wasn't born into Hollywood. You know what I mean? He was a guy from Louisiana, and then made his way to Hollywood, and then to make a film like this, to write and direct a film like this at that age, and then to win, the Palme D'Or and get all these accolades, is pretty great, and it speaks to the era and the people's thirst for independent cinema, or sort of what I always say is 90s cinema is very much like the cinema of the 60s, the Raging Bull, not Raging, sorry, not the Easy Rider era,
Right.
I guess that'd be late 60s, right?
That'd be 70s.
Early 70s, yeah. But yeah, I think it's really important. I need to watch it again. It's been a long time since I've seen it, but it's definitely important in the greater sense of being a prominent film that is helped to usher in the independent movement of the 90s. So there's a couple of films in between. Some of my greatest hits, as you were saying, don't include a lot of the movies that he made in between 1989 and 98.
Well, it's interesting because he, and I'm sure you're going to go into it, but it's funny because right after Sex, Lies, and Videotape, 2 years later, he goes from a budget of about $1 million to $11 million for Kafka, and then he has an actor like Jeremy Irons in the lead, and not only is that not ballsy, but that's a lot to have on his shoulders as a young director, going from $1 million to $11 million. But he decides to make most of that movie in black and white, which is pretty ballsy. I mean, Schindler's List does it, 2 years later, but just for your normal movie. And I remember in high school, we read a Kafka book, or what did we read? Metamorphosis, I think. Is that Kafka? And I was like, I want to learn more about Kafka. And I saw this movie, and I thought it was just like a biopic. And I watched it. And I was like, man, this is kind of weird. It's well done, but it's weird. And then he goes from 11 million down to 8 million because Kafka didn't do so well, to King of the Hill. King of the Hill didn't do so well, and like you saying, and then he goes to the Underneath, and then Grey's Anatomy, which is sort of his fascination with Spalding Gray, who's sort of like a famous monologuist writer, who he works with quite a bit, which we'll get to later. But like you're saying, he doesn't have the best.
He didn't prove himself to be commercially successful.
He didn't, which is funny now when you think about it. And I'll let you talk a little bit more because I feel like the film right after Grey's Anatomy is where things turn around a little bit. But
if you're talking about the movie Out of Sight,
no, I was actually going to say Schizopolis.
So this is on your list, so you should.
So Schizopolis.
School me on this one.
It's not too much on my list, but all I want to say about it is, so
it's on your list.
He's been unsuccessful up until this point, other than Sex, Lies, and Videotape, and he basically makes Schizopolis in 1996 as not only a palate cleanser, but also as sort of a way to reinvent himself. So he makes this film for basically no money. It says $250,000, but it's probably not that much money. And he's the lead actor in it. He writes it, he shoots it, and all that stuff. He doesn't edit it. One of his editors that he's worked with quite a bit edit it. But I feel like this is his first foray really into giving himself the confidence to be the DP, to be the writer, to be the director, and to just be heavily involved and producer. And it's a very weird film, but whatever it did for him, it worked because that was in 1996. Maybe it made him feel a little bit better, a little more confident. He got all of his demons out. It's sort of a satire on Scientology. And then he goes right into what Mark is going to talk about now, which is Out of Sight, which I think is really sort of his rebirth, his Phoenix rising from the ashes.
Yeah, Out of Sight, based on the Elmore Leonard novel. The movie comes on the heels of a lot of Elmore Leonard adaptation films.
Yeah, we were Elmore Leonard crazy.
Yeah, the 90s. I can think of Get
Shorty, Jackie Brown.
Right. So like, it was that so super cool, almost exploitation kind of idea, just like those other movies are, Get Shorty and Jackie Brown. But Out of Sight in all the Elmore Leonard movies is probably my favorite of the three.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And I think what's nice when you're kind of saying there too is like this movie especially like reaffirms what Hollywood tends to care about, which is your commercial appeal. Like how can you make a movie
right
that is appealing to a wide audience and that can make money? Because if you can do that as a director, you can kind of not do what you want, but you can sort of start making your own rules. And I think for Out of Sight, in that manner, in that respect, I guess, sort of helped him, because Out of Sight, like if you watch that and then Ocean's 11 years later, there's like a lot of similarities in terms of like how cool, like quote unquote cool they are and slick, And the one thing about Out of Sight, not the one thing, but one of the interesting parts about Out of Sight to me is the edit. There's a couple of scenes where he started experimenting with what us editors call the L cut. And if you don't know what the L cut is, it's essentially, there's a great scene in Out of Sight where Clooney and Jennifer Lopez
Yep, J-Lo.
Have the romantic scene, let's say.
Okay.
And then there's a...
the coitus?
Thank you. There's an edit where, you start to... you see a scene, it plays out, you hear the dialogue, you see them talking, and then all of a sudden they cut to another part of the scene, and you still hear that dialogue continuing from the scene previous. This not to get too in the weeds, but the reason they call that an L cut is because if you look at an editing timeline in any sort of editing program, that's essentially what you're doing is you're taking the visual and then you're extending the audio into the next visual, so it looks in the timeline visually like an L, so people just kind of adopted that name as the L cut. And no one does it better than the Soderberghs, because he does it a little bit in Out of Sight, and it makes for this really like kind of discombobulating, but almost like dream-like. Like you almost don't. Maybe you don't. You kind of it's like you almost don't believe what's happening because you're you're being the audio and the visuals are being disjointed. And that was my big takeaway from that movie. Not just like that specific thing, but one of those things was his experimenting in terms of pacing and editing, and like you said, shooting something from one sort of one vantage point, or so here's like a really commercial film for all intents and purposes, with big actors, big Hollywood whatever. But done in a way, it was done on his terms, for the most part. I feel like he kind of like, maybe this isn't as artistic as sort of Traffic or something.
Right.
But it definitely is like the starting, it's like what Fincher does, which is like combine artistry and commercialism really well. And this is sort of I think this is sort of the start of what Soderbergh's doing, or he's either figuring it out himself or the studios are figuring out how he best fits into their, system.
Well, what's funny about this is I think this was the first DVD I ever bought. I think I kind of remember going into a Hollywood Video. This was on sale. Just gotten a DVD player, and the first 2 DVDs I bought, I believe, were Out of Sight, and it had a black box with like a gold trim, and Truman Show. I think those were the 2 first ones. So I definitely like this movie a lot. It's written by Scott Frank, who did Minority Report and Logan most recently. Great performance by an early J-Lo. Also, Soderbergh, I think, sort of like his first foray into sort of that like caper / comedy heist mentality with an ensemble cast, because you had Ving Rhames, Don Cheadle, Catherine Keener, Steve Zahn, Albert Brooks, Luis Guzman. So,
and Michael Keaton playing.
Oh, that's right.
The same character from Jackie Brown, and Samuel L. Jackson actually playing the same.
Yes.
They cross over.
And so what's great about this is, like Mark said, he solidified his commercial appeal. You have a George Clooney. Maybe this probably the first movie that really solidified him as sort of like that leading man, modern Cary Grant, if you will, who he could kind of do anything. And then speaking of the editing, I mean, he had Anne V. Coates, Oscar winner for Lawrence of Arabia, one of the most famous female editors of all time, who would also join him on Erin Brockovich later on. But just a great team. He surrounded himself with a great team. We're not saying he needs a great writer or DP like Elliot Davis on this film, or editor, because he can do it himself. But he turned to some other collaborators, and it worked out.
Well, I'm sure these guys that are specific to their tool as editing or cinematography, I'm sure you learned a bunch from these people as well. So it's you can see the wheels turning when you kind of look through his filmography. Also, I think what's great about this, and from a Clooney's perspective, is Clooney's brand to me is the leading guy that's not afraid to be a little bit goofy.
Right.
He's not afraid to be a little bit silly. And I think leading up to this film, he was sort of just like the handsome guy, you know what I mean? Or like he's kind of like this almost suave kind of dude. And I feel like in this movie, he gets to flex his muscles a little bit, which is what he's really more known for, I think, in films.
Yeah, and I think he didn't really know what he wanted to do, because, he went from Dusk Till Dawn. He was sort of a badass. Then he went down to One Fine Day as a leading man love interest. Then he went to Batman and Robin, actually, which he kind of regrets and will make fun of. Then The Peacemaker, which, wasn't great for him. But then I feel like Out of Sight is where like badass, charming, dramatic, funny, all morphed into one. And I think that's where he found his sweet spot, and where every role after that sort of...
Another good piece of trivia for you, too, for you nerds out there, especially the Batman nerds. Michael Keaton and George Clooney both played Batman, and this is the only film that ever 2 actors that played Batman ever appear in, or more, more than one act,
Even with Ben Affleck now?
Yeah, I think so.
Interesting.
Has Ben Affleck ever been in a movie with Val Kilmer or Michael Keaton or George Clooney?
I'm going to think about that.
Maybe George Clooney. Maybe that's the outlier that I.
Yeah, I mean, because I feel like Ben Affleck would be a good holdover there, because he's been in both. But I'll have to think about that while you were talking.
There's nothing really to think about. It just is or it isn't.
Well, I'm just trying to go through my own database.
So yeah, Out of Sight. I think this is the beginning of Soderbergh really taking off in that, appealing to his artistic senses, but also making a commercial film. I still think it's great. It's a fun movie, just like Ocean's 11. It's super fun, funny. It's a good time. So, Moving on, the next film I would like to discuss is the movie that came out the year after, which is called The Limey. This is a film that you said you have not seen, and I implore you to watch it.
I want to watch it. I love revenge movies. One of my friends does too. And Terrence Stamp, cool actor, Neal before Zod. So yeah, I'm really interested in checking this out.
Super cool in this movie, and he's like, it's a lot like it's kind of fish out of watery,
right?
You know how like in sort of the reverse in the movie, the Guy Ritchie movie. What I'm talking about,
Snatch.
Mm-hmm. You know when Dennis Franz? No.
Yeah, Dennis Farina.
Dennis Farina, thank you, the Chicago guy. When he goes to London, he's a fish out of the water. You know what I mean? This is kind of the opposite. This is the guy coming to LA. And Peter
Fonda.
Peter Fonda, thank you. I'm like terrible at names. Thank you so much. Peter Fonda and him play off each other really well because, you know, the whole story really is about Terrence Stamp discovers that his sort of, what's the word? Kind of long, I don't want to say a long lost daughter, but definitely a estranged kind of daughter has come up killed, basically. And he comes to LA to figure out who did it, you know, like he, you know, comes to find out she's ran around with some pretty bad dudes and essentially becomes a revenge film. But what makes this film so great to me, and this is very influential to me in college when I saw this film, is the edit, because
I heard the editing is really good in this.
So in the movie Out of Sight, as you were talking about with, we were talking about the L cut. They used that same technique throughout this whole film, where it's almost discombobulating when you see it at first. You have to see it a few times and get the rhythm of it to not feel like you're not like to not feel like you totally don't know what's going on. But Sarah Flack edited this film. She's famous. She worked, or I should say, she's worked with Sofia Coppola mostly. So like Lost in Translation and Marie Antoinette, those movies. But this movie has a lot of flashback scenes, and what's great about the L cut used so heavily in this movie is it helps those flashback scenes in terms of how important they are, and how almost present they feel because of everything being kind of edited in that same style. And it's weird because, you know, Soderbergh had to have had this thought when he was when he was like shooting the film, I should say. You know, you had to have, because there's a lot of scenes where it plays out really long, where you're like, you know, you would normally cut there. You know what I mean? You would normally like not rolling more film or something. But I like the idea that, and I don't know this for sure, but I'm just presuming that he had like planned this, which I think is really interesting. And the last thing I'll say about that is, for me, as an editor, and I watch a film, sometimes like my wife or friends will ask like, oh, you know, or it's not all the time, but they'll ask like, oh, what did you think about the editing? Or the editing was, you know, this, that, and the other. And to me, I always say, if I didn't notice it, it was great, because, you know, that's like kind of the goal of the editor is to like make the story, make the characters, make everything come to life in a way where it doesn't, it seems natural, seems real, seems like you're there, everything flows, you know? In this sense, in the regards to The Limey, or even like a recent film by Harmony Korine, Spring Breakers, the editing is a tool that is, in most settings or most films, would be like too much. Like it would be
like sensory overload.
Yeah, it would be too cute. You know what I mean? It'd just be like something that you know, like you're just trying too hard, kind of thing. But in this sense, in The Limey specifically too, it really helps propel that story and tell it really well. And I think, you know, it's totally worth a watch. And then on a random note, the cover of The Limey is like one of my favorite movie covers of all time. It takes that Blue Note jazz, kind of those Blue Note jazz album covers, and applies it to like this movie poster, which I think is really rad. And I've never seen anyone do that before. So
yeah, I'm really excited to check this one out. Well, right after that, I mean, a year after that, he actually has a nice 1-2 punch, Oscar-winning punch for both of them, pretty much. So in 2000, he has Erin Brockovich, which was the film that won Julia Roberts her Oscar. It's sort of, I feel like it sort of brought to light that Hollywood trend of, take someone who's really pretty, male or female, and if you want to have them win an Oscar, they either play someone who's disabled, someone who is much less attractive than they are, or you kind of dirty them up a little bit. And that was sort of the sentiment when Julia Roberts took this role, that she wasn't America's sweetheart necessarily, that she was sort of this hardworking woman who, didn't give a care what anyone else thought and spoke her mind, and she wasn't sort of a quiet, reserved, smiling all the time Julia Roberts. So this movie did a lot for her. I think it really made her... She was a legitimate actress before, but I feel like she was more of a legitimate Hollywood actress. She was someone who was dependable, who was good in the roles. She's been very good in a lot of her movies, but this one I feel like people gave her more credit.
She's not necessarily like a leading lady in this movie either. You know what I mean?
Right.
In the sense of like...
Yeah. She's almost more of a character actor.
Like a romantic...
Well, that's what's nice about it.
Like,
yeah.
She can play like a character that... And the one takeaway I had from watching Erin Brockovich, I like this... excuse me, I like this movie. I am not a fan of Julia Roberts. It's just, she's never appealed to me as an actress. But if there's one movie, and there's, if I'm thinking hard enough, I'm sure there's a couple other movies that I liked a lot of hers. But if there's one movie that I think stands above all the rest, it's this one, because I think she still is her Hollywood charming self in the movie, but it works in a way. If you know Erin Brockovich, like the real person, and you've seen her interviewed or seen her on TV or whatever, I don't know if she nailed her persona, but she has a similar. They both have similarities. I think it just happened to work really, really well.
Like a similar aura.
Yeah, with Julia Roberts, and it's a great film. Though I forgot about this movie. I forgot this was a Soderbergh film, because he had a hot 2000.
He did have a really hot 2000. You're right.
And
another film produced by Danny DeVito as well, which Out of Sight was produced by Danny DeVito.
Yeah.
So I wonder if that had something to do with it. And he had Ann V. Coates back as editor. And then, just quickly, really good performances by Albert Finney, and then a sort of up and coming Aaron Eckhart, which I feel like after this movie, it really catapulted him to getting more leading man roles.
And this was a double nomination for him for Best Director in 2000, with this one and the next film we'll be talking about. So
yep,
that's pretty interesting. And Julia Roberts, I think she won almost every actress award she was nominated for in this movie, including the Oscar.
She won the Oscar for this one. Yep.
So yeah, you can tell that this movie and then the next one is really propelling. Like when you look at the sort of filmography, is really like propelling Steven in that commercial, and he's gaining. He's figuring out a way to sort of not that his goal is to attain it, but he's definitely receiving that critical and commercial acclaim. So
well, what is that next film?
Traffic
2000.
Highly regarded. To me, this is Soderbergh at his absolute best in terms of style, in terms of story. I can't believe he made this film in the same year he made Erin Brockovich. They're two entirely different films.
Very different. One he shot, one he did not.
Yeah, this is a film. Yeah, I think I don't know if it's his first, but a trend that would continue throughout the 2000s, which is a film that he actually operated camera on. And was DP, I believe, right?
He was DP, yeah. So anytime you see the name Peter Andrews, that's actually Steven Soderbergh as director of photography. It's his dad's first and middle name. And then anytime you see, I'm forgetting her name now. Anytime you see Mary Ann Bernard,
thank you, yeah.
That's his mom's name, and that's when he edits a film. So he does it. The reason he does it is he said a quote once, which was, I don't want to put my name all over a movie as director, producer, writer, DP, and editor, because it dilutes the importance of my role. And so that's why he keeps his name under director, maybe writer, but DP and editor if he does do those jobs. He uses those other names as sort of a tribute to his parents.
Which is interesting, because I always just assumed it was because he had there was some sort of guild, there was some sort of like credit reason he couldn't do it. So.
And fun fact, trivia fans, anytime someone uses the name Alan Smithy, that is that they don't want their name on the movie.
Yeah.
And that's a DGA name that was created in the 60s, I believe like 1967, around there, where if a director is unhappy with the work that they've done or the way the studio has ruined their movie, they use the name Alan Smithy in the credits. So, for example, the movie Showgirls, it's panned sort of globally, but when the movie is playing on TV, the director's name is Alan Smithy. So that's a fun one to look up.
Fun fact.
Fun fact today.
By Neil Fisher.
All rights reserved.
I think what's most prominent about Traffic is it's a story that talks about, this particular story talks about the war on drugs, or the supposed war on drugs. And I think what was so interesting about this film, and I think what drew him to it, is it wasn't about drug abuse per se. It was about the realities of what the entire thing was, from the people that create, that manufacture the drugs, to the people that have to enforce the penalties of selling said drugs and using said drugs, to the personal stories of people that got involved with actually doing said drugs and getting hooked on them, and basically how the whole thing, how the whole works through a personal lens, through specific characters. And the immediate takeaway when you look at it visually is, which is funny because now I was looking back at Traffic, looking back at some scenes and stuff, and it's very distinctive in its color palette.
Yeah, the color palette is very interesting in this movie.
There's the very blue color palette that represents Michael Keaton and Michael Douglas, excuse me, and the sort of Cleveland, Ohio, the sort of suburb America, that whole look. There's the very, very hot yellow Mexican,
very
Mexico
like desert
look with Benicio, and then sort of the more kind of in between palette as well with the DEA, or the DEA guys, I believe, Don Cheadle, and Luis Guzman, and I find it really interesting they did that, and I think it's really great, a useful tool as an audience, because you can, as soon as you jump back into that color, you know where you are, you know exactly what's, not exactly, but I'm saying you know like the situation. And it's funny because when that movie first came out, it was like everyone was like, "Oh my god, that's so cool! He's using that color like that." Now I think like I see that in movies emulated all the time. You know what I mean? Like it's not like
everyone uses it. And like you said, it's a movie with like very in-depth and complicated storylines and interweaving storylines. I mean, I believe it was based on a TV show or a miniseries.
A British TV show, yeah.
And, on TV shows, you have a lot more episodes, a lot more time to delve into character and things like that. And in a film, you don't. So even though it's 147 minutes, what I think is smart about the color palette choice is even if you drop off for 1 second, as soon as you see that golden color palette, you're like, okay, well, I'm in the South now. I'm in the drug storyline. Then you go to the blue, and then you're in the more the government side. And the only takeaway I remember from this film, I haven't seen it in quite a long time, but I just remember, and I could be mistaken, but it was. I learned for the first time that people were hiding drugs in like dolls. Wasn't there a doll?
Yeah.
And then like they take the head off and there's drugs inside.
Right.
Yeah. And I was like, oh man, if they're transferring dolls like that, you could get drugs in anyway. So.
Or in your butthole.
Well, yeah, that's the more preferred way. But this one's a great example.
Another thing about the visual style, I'll say real quick too, is I love the fact that he decided to pick up the camera and he operated the camera. I think they operated 2 cameras on this movie, and he was basically camera A. And I like that the director's hand literally is like present in the film, because there is so many intimate stories, but sort of portraits of all these different angles on the drug war. And I like the fact that he used a lot of available light, which at the time was like so crazy to, unless you were shooting a documentary or you just didn't have, the budget. A big Hollywood film would obviously have a bunch of lighting, but he was like, I want to move. I want to move quickly.
Right.
I want to move quickly. I want to shoot these scenes. I want to get into the action, essentially.
It's that indie sensibility, and it also serves the story, because this is a real story. It's not a pretty story, and there's no need to make it pretty.
And it's funny, this came out when I was in film school, and we were, in like different cinematography classes, lighting classes, and we would learn like, okay, here's your fill light, here's your key light, here's your whatever.
Backlight,
we're going to do, so your classic lighting setup, we're going to use Kino flows. Excuse me, we're going to do various other sort of normal sort of, let's call them quote unquote Hollywood techniques. But this guy sort of said, nah, screw that. I'm going to win an Oscar and I'm going to do all this great stuff with like almost no light, just a lamp on in the corner, and I think it's, pretty effective. So,
yeah, I agree.
and we should say, I feel like it should have won Best Picture that year. I don't remember how it was nominated, but it got nominated, but it did win 4 Oscars, including Best Supporting Role for Benicio del Toro, Best Directing, Best Writing, and Best Film Editing.
So you're saying it didn't live up to what you wanted it to be?
Well, it's funny because I thought like, oh, he's nominated so many times for Oscar for 2 different movies. There's no way he's not going to win Traffic. He's going to win Best Picture, but sure enough, he did not.
Well, I think
what won that year? Can you see on your computer?
Yeah. So the
was it Beautiful Mind? No, that would have been after that.
No. If it's 2001, I want to say it was probably Gladiator, and I could be wrong.
I think that was 2000, wasn't it?
Yep. So it was.
Gladiator,
it was Gladiator,
right. Okay,
Chocolat,
that's not bad then.
Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, Erin Brockovich, and Traffic. So that's pretty. I remember when this happened. I was obviously a little younger, but I said, man, this guy, both the movies he directed that year, up for Best Picture. He's nominated as Best Director for Traffic and Erin Brockovich. So like I was thinking to myself, you have to give him like one of these awards, because for him to make 2 of those movies in the same year,
yeah,
it's pretty crazy. And he was also.
Would you say this is a quintessential Soderbergh film? Sorry, I didn't mean to.
Quintessential Soderbergh. Yeah, it's one of them. I think he's so versatile. I mean, right now as we're talking, I think you'd want to go Sex, Lies, and Videotape shows his early indie sensibilities. Then you'd go Out of Sight, and then you'd go Traffic. Erin Brockovich is great. It's a biopic.
And Traffic is so gritty, but
I
hate to use that term, but there's another really way to describe it.
Yeah, and I think between Erin Brockovich and Traffic, you have to lean towards Traffic. I mean, Erin Brockovich is great. He did a great job with it. It's a little bit more of an indie movie, but Traffic, I feel like that would be a hard movie for anyone to make, and he made it memorable.
Kind of crazy to shift gears to like that,
Well, it is, and it's even crazier. And I'm just going to kind of gloss over. Or actually, we're not even going there, but to even shift gears from Erin Brockovich Traffic into Ocean's 11, from 2001, which I also would put in quintessential.
Let's go right into Ocean's 11.
Soderbergh. Yeah. So, you're talking about a movie.
This is a hot 3 movies in a row.
Yeah. You're talking about a remake of a famous Rat Pack film. Now, I'm a huge Rat Pack fan. I'm a huge Frank Sinatra fan. Anyone who knows me.
Rat Pack?
Rat Pack. I'm a huge Brat Pack, and I'm a huge Rat Pack.
I love the Rat Pack.
So I'm a gigantic Frank Sinatra fan, which everyone who knows me knows. But the Ocean's 11, the original movie, it's not that great. It's okay. I mean, it's fun seeing them all on screen.
You mean Frank Sinatra Jr., his son, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So Frank Sinatra and the Rat Pack in that movie, really great to see them on screen. But you can tell that they just came, they like hung out, they had fun, and then they left. Like they didn't really care about the movie. Soderbergh basically does the same thing, where he casts, this cast, when it first came out, I remember I was like, man, this is crazy. You have Matt Damon, Brad Pitt, George Clooney, Julia Roberts, Andy Garcia. Are you kidding me? And then then you throw, Casey Affleck and Scott Conn in there, and Bernie Mac, and it's just
rest in peace.
Yeah, rest in peace. It's a crazy movie, especially to give it to a guy who, is known for a different type of movie, but he proved himself with Brockovich and Traffic, winning the Oscar and everything. And what's great about this movie is a few things. The soundtrack's amazing. Soderbergh DPs this movie again. So he goes from Traffic, which is like Mark said, like kind of a gritty movie, to sort of, your classic. This is a classic Hollywood movie.
This is far from Traffic.
Far from Traffic. Yeah. Big stars, spectacle, heist movie. A quick example, you have a scene with Brad Pitt and George Clooney talking while they're driving. Most movies, you do a shot on Brad Pitt, shot on George Clooney, maybe shoot it with projection in the background, or you put it on a car rig, and then you set the camera up in front of it. He just sticks the camera up on a mount in the back of the car, which is one of my favorite shots that he's ever done. And then the car's just traveling, the camera's stationary in the back.
It just changes, yeah.
Yeah, just a cool shot. And it's sort of a little bit of a commentary on Hollywood, I think, subtly, with the poker game in the beginning and the way that they are sort of their own rock stars and their own movie stars. But the last thing, I love how Brad Pitt in this movie just eats the entire time, just like he does in every movie. But he eats a lot in this movie.
He's got like that hidden, which is cool. They have like he has like a hidden forearm tattoo as well.
Yes.
That you can barely see. And then throughout the sequels, you can kind of see a little bit more. But yeah, this is a fun movie from beginning to end. It's watchable. You can watch it a million times, still enjoy it. Still enjoy the twist.
Carl Reiner is really great. Sorry.
Still enjoy the ensemble. Casey Affleck and Scott Conn are great as the sort of bickering brothers or whatever they are. And Don Cheadle's great. The whole thing is great, and it's so it's
just cool.
It's like you can kind of write it off as like a popcorn film, and that's fine. I think that's a reasonable expectation or reasonable sort of distinction, but it's done still through the lens of a guy who is thinking creatively and creating like creating a sort of independent sensibility around this sort of really big studio film with big studio actors and actresses.
We got big studio stars for a big studio picture.
It's going to be a big picture, and I think it's one of his best movies for that reason, and I think it's interesting that we won't really get into the other ones, but Oceans 12 and 13, he directed those too. And so I think it's kind of interesting that he kind of followed suit, kind of kept the style and decided to sort of follow the...
He does some great DP work in this too. I mean, there's a lot of different color palettes and different scenes for different moods.
Yeah.
You have the sunny Vegas, like summery feel. You have, he gets sort of abstract inside the hotel with Danny Ocean and Andy Garcia. I will say my favorite part of this whole movie, and it's a scene that I love and I watch sometimes on repeat, Claire de Lune is one of my favorite pieces of music of all time.
The Fountain.
And the fact that he paired that, with the Fountain at the Bellagio as the swan song of
most movies, they would cut that scene out.
They would, and it's the swan song of this team that they succeeded in what they wanted to do. You loved these characters throughout the whole piece. And it's sort of that, like, we did it.
And the balls of that team to like pull off a heist like that, to steal that much money and then just kind of hang out at the Bellagio for a second.
Yeah. Really pretty scene though.
But yeah, I read online that was actually improv in terms of everyone and when they left. Like he said, he basically wanted Brad Pitt and maybe Matt Damon, I can't remember, like kind of leave first. I can't remember exactly. But he basically had like two people, and he was like, "You guys leave first. Everyone else just do what feels natural to you." And I think that's kind of interesting.
That is really cool.
How they did that. So yeah, it's a great scene.
After Ocean's 11, he does Full Frontal, which was kind of a disappointment for him. He had Julia Roberts back into it. That movie was
like
not
the Dogma film. Like
it was about Hollywood.
Shot on mini DV, right?
Yeah, and it didn't. It didn't resonate, I think, the way he probably wanted it to. And then he follows that up with Solaris, which was a remake. And that one I remember not being a huge fan of.
I feel like that maybe when the first movie he actually cut too. Like the first thing he...
he was Marianne Bernard in that one. But that one, I just don't... That one didn't do as well either. I think it was... The budget was around $50 million.
I remember being super psyched about that movie.
Me too.
And
the trailers I remember were
it's
great.
Not a bad movie, but it's not memorable for sure.
Yeah. It's very similar to the original.
Yeah. It's funny how like a lot of these are remakes too.
Yeah, that's true. So I feel like...
I think what's interesting too, just one little tidbit that I want to throw out there too with Ocean's 11 I forgot to mention. Talking about how you were saying about how Kafka was shot, some of it was shot in black and white and everything. He actually wanted to shoot this movie. His original intention was shoot Ocean's 11 black and white, and I was thinking that would be kind of rad. You know what I mean? Like think about that movie in black and white.
Ocean's 11 in black and white. I mean, the original wasn't even in black and white.
It wasn't from 1960.
No, that was in color.
It wasn't like recolored or it wasn't one of those Ted Turner things.
No. I mean, it was just normal film.
So we'll get to some of the newer films.
Yeah. We can gloss over the other ones a little bit here. So, he did some writing work uncredited or he did some executive producing. He did executive produce Syriana, because Stephen Gaghan, also wrote Traffic. And then, he did this film, which I saw quickly when it was on video, and I didn't appreciate it at the time, but I want to rewatch it because it's called The Good German. He was cinematographer on that one, editor and director. George Clooney, Cate Blanchett, one of the best actresses out there. Tobey Maguire, who I could take or leave, and I'm sure in that movie he's probably annoying. But the thing I like about it is when I was in high school, I was in a humanities class, and we watched Christmas in Connecticut, I believe was the movie we watched. And I told the teacher, I said, I love old movies. I think, when Hollywood tries to remake movies or make homages to those movies, they never do a good enough job because the lenses were different, the cameras were different, lighting styles were different, sound, all that. And he said, well, maybe one day, you can pick that movie or another one of the old classics that you like and remake with that in mind. Soderbergh actually did it here. He shoots with all old cameras. He doesn't use any zoom lenses, which a lot of DPs prefer to use. So, a zoom lens, basically, you can, if you don't know what that is, when you have a lens on a camera, you can have, let's say an 18 millimeter lens, which is a wide angle lens. You could see a huge amount of space of what your subject, what you're filming. But then immediately just by twisting it, you can go up to a 55 millimeter, which is a long lens, which is going to give you that shallow depth of field where it's a little blurry behind the actor. And you can quickly go from a wide to a close up, saves time. In the old days, they didn't have that. They had prime lenses. They had fixed lenses. So it was either, okay, you want an 18? Sure. I want a 25 now. Okay, we got to take that one off. We got to put the 25 on. So he used all old lenses. He used the old camera. He used old styles of lighting, new types of lighting setups. And then as far as sound, he didn't allow them to use lav mics, which are mics that you can tape on your chest and hide so you get much better sound and the actors can emote a little quieter. They can kind of whisper and you can hear it perfectly instead of having the old-fashioned boom. But he went away with that and only used a boom. So I do commend him for that, and I need to rewatch it. I watched the trailer, and it looks great. I mean, it looks like an old movie, and if you're going to put a male actor in an old movie, you might as well put George Clooney in there. He's got those classic features, and Cate Blanchett can pretty much do anything. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't believe I've seen that movie. If I have, it's been a long time. But
yeah, and black and white. I mean, pretty gutsy, like we said. It did not do well, though. It had almost a $40 million budget, and it only grossed like $1 million. It was a pretty big flop. But then he went back to his cash cow, which was to make up for Ocean's 12. He did Ocean's 13, which was a lot better than the second one.
So a couple of things I'd like to talk about in the movie Che, as I call them, Che 1 and 2.
Okay.
This
is the movie about Michael Che, the Weekend Update anchor?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
No, it's about Che Guevara, the revolutionist.
Who was a doctor before he was a revolutionist.
Is that a word? Revolutionist? Maybe.
Revolutionary?
Yeah. There you go.
That's what
I've seen
here
this
for.
movie. It's been a long time. I think it's a little indulgent, and I think
Yeah.
the two parts are a little bit much. I think the movie could have been combined. Like it's kind of like the Matrix trilogy. It could have been combined into maybe.
It is kind of indulgent, especially for the amount of money that he spent on these. $40 million in the first one, $35 million in the second. That's insane.
The most notable fact about these films, about the two films, is, to my knowledge, is the first feature film that used the red camera. In fact, the red camera wasn't even available. Yeah, this is a prototype. It was something that was shown as an example to Soderbergh, and he wanted to shoot on this film, or he wanted to shoot using the red camera. But then ultimately they decided on film because the red camera wasn't available. But then they had a delay in their production, and the owner, the guy that started Oakley, who started Red, said, "I got the prototypes ready. You should use them on your film." So he convinced Soderbergh to use, basically like days out from shooting, to use a completely digital format. And the stories I read were kind of a nightmare because the format was so new, and because of the cameras being so new, and no one really had used them before. Yep. There was a sort of a learning curve that really affected the film. And I was also reading at some point that the South American weather made these cameras so hot that they had to put like straight up ice, like ice bags around, like strapped around these cameras just to keep them cool, because I guess a lot of the kinks of the, like this is like a real beta testing of a camera.
Red still kind of has that. I mean, they've been a camera where they've had a lot of kinks, and you kind of have to, it's trial by fire because there's a lot of add-ons and things like that. And I remember reading about that, about the ice packs and everything.
And, one thing I think that's interesting style-wise about this film, too, is you have two different films, essentially, about the same guy, played by the same actor. And one of the films is handheld, almost 16 millimeter, like I think they shot with the red, emulating what 16 millimeter looks like. And documentary style, much like a lot of his films. And then the other film was shot more Hollywood style, with like the sort of more crisp image with dolly moves and, tripod shots. And I think that's kind of interesting that he kind of like chose like one subject in two different films to kind of like, to sort of parlay, sort of like separate two different styles that he's like, doing. Because in the end, with Soderbergh, I feel like he doesn't really own a particular style. I think this is what we're getting at, is like he's evolving, and he's like, he's using something that he thinks functions well for each, individual piece.
Right.
And I think there's no better example than a movie like Che. It's worth a watch. Like I said, I think it's a little indulgent. I think it's long. I liked a lot of parts of it. I wish like the two movies could be combined into one solid film.
Right.
I think Benicio del Toro is great. I think Che is also very controversial. So to make a Hollywood film about a guy that's not, it's not like Martin Luther King or someone that everyone kind of can get behind. It's very political. So, yeah.
Well, after that, we mentioned it before, he does The Girlfriend Experience. He goes low budget again, taking an adult film actress who hadn't really done a major role before and kind of writing it around her. Somewhat successful, not very successful. Sasha Grey got decent reviews, but it did spawn a television show right now, which is very popular on Starz, also called The Girlfriend Experience. Same year, in 2009, he did The Informant, which I was very pleasantly surprised when I saw that movie. It was written by Scott Z. Burns, who's a writer that he's worked with a few times. He's a great writer. And sort of a Coen Brothers-esque. I mean, it's a true story, along with some sort of whimsical comedy. Matt Damon plays just sort of like this.
That's a good way to describe that movie. Yeah.
Yeah.
Coen Brothers-esque.
I just remember seeing it, and I didn't know what to expect, and I really enjoyed it. And once again, cinematographer on that one. After that, though, he does a pair of movies that really go well together. And actually, I shouldn't say that. Sorry, I'm thinking 2 years apart. He does the Contagion and Side Effects, which go really well together.
Right.
Which I think were also written by Scott Z. Burns. I'm just going to say it anyway. So Contagion, which Mark could talk about, and Side Effects, very similar styles, like ensemble cast.
If you think about this real quick, I just want to put this out there because I think it kind of loops into what you're saying. Traffic, all about the war on drugs through multiple people, right?
Yes.
Contagion, all about widespread outbreak of disease told by multiple people from different perspectives. Mm-hmm. And then the other one, Side Effects,
about pharmaceutical side effects, and addiction,
and with a large cast.
Large
so it's almost
cast.
like a trilogy of sorts in terms of theme. In terms of like telling a specific thing through all these people's eyes.
No, you're right.
At least that's the way I looked at it.
No, I agree. Actually, just quickly, Haywire, I already talked about it. Gina Carano, just like Girlfriend Experience, which is another pairing for that. The two non-actor pairing. You have Sasha Grey in The Girlfriend Experience, and then Gina Carano and Haywire sort of surrounds them with seasoned actors. Haywire was really interesting quickly because I remember seeing the movie. The trailers made it out to be like sort of this, crazy action flick and all that. But when Soderbergh goes into an action flick, it's much more artistic. The fight scenes were shot really well. The dialogue scenes were shot really well. And it's just looked at from more of an independent lens, I think. And I thought Carano did a nice job in that movie. And now she's been doing a million movies. But then back to Contagion, man, talk about a movie that after you see the movie, I think I saw this in IMAX or at least in the theater. Talk about a movie when you're out of it. You do not want to touch anyone. You don't want to touch door handles. I was scared of any germ killing me.
for weeks after this movie.
And that's all due to him. I mean,
Yeah.
due to the way he shot this movie. I mean, I think he uses a lot of like shallow depth of field. Like you see people's face like very, very up close when they're like super sick. Kate Winslet throws in a really good performance here. Gwyneth Paltrow does. And
well, the best part about this movie, I think, is not really like the disease that's the forefront. It's not like
right.
the movie Outbreak or something. It's more like, what does society do?
It's how we deal with it
when this happens.
And how inept we were dealing with it too.
And I love, spoiler alert, so you might want to stop it here, but I love how when the movie ends and you see the source of this whole outbreak, which is like so cool how they kind of go backwards and
it shows you the whole story of like where it came from.
And I just, I think it's it's so effective. Like you said, I didn't feel safe on a train or any public space for a long time. It was, it just made me feel like, especially like I have 2 boys too, so I just kept thinking about like, anyone has children and like what you would do, like, what would you do in this situation? And if anything, unlike the war on drugs, you might not be like doing illicit drugs. You may not have anyone that does illicit drugs in your family. You may not have, that connection, but like a disease, an airborne disease like this could affect anybody. You know what I mean? It's not like you get to choose this thing. You know what I mean? It will choose you if so be. And that's the most like scariest part. And what's even more scarier is when Graham Genji, who's the executive producer here at Radar Studios, his sister works for the CDC or something like that. And she had, he wanted to know what his theory was, because a lot of scientific community had said it was pretty accurate in terms of, the science behind it, how the world would deal with it, And she was saying like, it was pretty close, like pretty accurate, I think, with what would happen. But the only not true part is they would have not found a vaccine for it that quickly, and they would not have been able to distribute it that quickly.
Right. So just cheer up moment.
Yeah. So like it was already freaked out, and then, but yeah, you're right. Side effects, traffic, to me, Contagion all have like a very, it's almost like we were talking about with M. Night Shyamalan, where it's like, it's just a ghost story with a twist. It's just a monster movie with a twist. It's just a alien movie with a twist. I think these are just like sort of more personal lensed version of these like larger, larger massive problems, you know what I mean? Like that people are dealing with.
No, I agree. And I know we quickly mentioned, and everything is going fine. That was also sort of like his ode to his friend, the writer we were talking about, and comedian Spalding Gray. One film we kind of glossed over, I forgot about, in sort of his Real People, I suppose, trilogy. It would be Haywire, Girlfriend Experience, and then Bubble, which we mentioned. Very low budget film. A lot of people think it's kind of weird. He went to a real town, used real people in their real homes, but a great experiment nonetheless. The next film, I remember I was super pleasantly surprised about this movie. And I went to the theater with a friend to see this movie. My girlfriend and her friends were super excited. Every girl I knew was just oozing with enthusiasm to see this film on opening night, midnight. So my girlfriend went, I believe she went on midnight, and I went to another theater with a friend. I don't know. I don't think I went by myself. If I did, I was in the back with like an overcoat, but I think I went with a friend. So I went with a friend, and I remember being in the lobby of the AMC, just packed with women everywhere. And there was like really douchey guy came up to me, and he's like, "Am I right, bro?" And I like looked at him, and I was like, "About what?" And he's like, "Yoga pants, bro. Yoga pants." Then he like made me like give him a fist pump. And he's like, he was going to see Transformers, I think actually it was out at the time. And he said, "I'm going to go see Transformers. What are you seeing?" And I looked at him, I was like, "Magic Mike." And then he shut up and leave me alone. So the thing I like about this movie, though, is all these women went to go see it. And every woman I talked to, for the most part, was not happy with it. I mean, they liked it, but they weren't, all their expectations were so high because they thought they were going to see like all this male stripping and dancing and nudity.
Yeah.
Once again, if they listened to this podcast in the future and then went back in time, they would know Soderbergh approaches every project with an independent and artistic vision.
Right.
And Magic Mike,
He's not going to give you what you think you're going to see.
right? And yes, there are abs, but it's
The problem is he doesn't get to edit his trailers.
Well, right. He doesn't get to edit the trailers. But this film is a lot more
You do see Dick in it. I mean,
sort of, yeah. It has a lot more heart to it, though. I mean, you're following, these two characters. It's basically Channing Tatum's young adulthood. It's true. It's his experiences, and Channing Tatum is really good in this. Soderbergh is so good with actors. He gets great performances out of them. Another ensemble with Matthew Bomer, Matthew McConaughey. Just great actors.
I like how the film is really like a series of scenes too. And what I mean by that is like when you watch it, it's unclear to like the plot is obviously known, but it's not like clear where everyone's headed. You know what I mean? Like where everything's going.
Right.
It's not like, hey, we got to save the strip club. Let's, what I mean? Like there's something about it that's like,
right.
You just go to the next scene and you enjoy whatever's happening. You know what I mean? And it kind of unfolds, if you will. And I don't mean to be like totally, that's not like a totally like lame.
No, I think
pun or something, but
I think what's interesting about it too is, it could have been a different movie. It could have just been strippers stripping and girls going wild and, and just a spectacle. But you see these guys, you have Channing Tatum who, wants to build furniture, to be a carpenter or like be an artist almost.
Yeah.
And then he's kind of does the stripping on the side, like the real Channing Tatum. I mean, he always wanted to be a performer and actor, but it just didn't work out until later. And then you have these sort of seasoned veterans in the background who have done this forever, with a great small role by Kevin Nash, Big Daddy Diesel, a wrestler, one of my favorites. But one thing I do like about this movie, I will say, normally in these romances, you have the male character who's usually an attractive guy, and then he always ends up with like a super attractive girl, and they put this girl on a pedestal. And it's a nice reversal because the girl in the film, the female lead, I know a lot of girls don't like her because they didn't think she was attractive enough for Channing Tatum, but whatever. So she's just like a normal girl and living a normal life, which is great. And then Channing Tatum is the one that's put on the pedestal. He's sort of the person that you ogle and you put your affection towards. And I was very pleasantly surprised by this. I thought I actually quite enjoyed it. I haven't seen the sequel yet. I probably should. I know there's a Backstreet Boys musical interlude. But Soderbergh didn't direct the sequel, Double XL. He still was the cinematographer. He still was the editor and producer, but he did not direct it. But once again, I mean, taking on a subject matter, a genre that Steven Soderbergh would have no business doing. I mean, if you pitch this into a meeting like, okay, we're going to get the Sex, Lies, and Videotape guy and Traffic guy, and he's going to do a movie about male strippers. I mean, it just doesn't make sense, but it works in the end. And then going a little forward, I haven't seen Logan Lucky yet. I really want to, but that one we can't really include in our final list because we haven't seen it. But Steven Soderbergh back to form. He said he was going to retire, but he came back to do this, and I hear it's really good. He has great reviews. So
yeah, it looks great, and it looks like one of his more sort of quote unquote fun ride kind of movies like Ocean's 11 or Out of Sight. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that. But I guess we should deliberate.
Yeah, let's deliberate and get this
back.
list.
And now it's time to announce the best of the best.
Hey, we're back, and I'm sweaty like Magic Mike.
Yeah, we did a routine in the mirror.
Dance off.
Made sure our hips were loose.
Yeah.
And that we stared at our prey. Stared at your prey. Whatever the line is, I can't remember.
That's it. Now, what does it say? Oh, fuck. I can't remember the line. I ruined it. I was going to say one of the Matthew McConaughey lines. Like,
The moth,
see a bunch of- I see it.
moth McConaughey. It's a moth named Moth
I see a bunch of
McConaughey.
lawbreakers out there. Whatever.
Yeah, see a bunch of lawbreakers out there.
So really quickly before we do the top five,
Yeah.
the best of the best, are Ron Harper and
Steve Kerr. No, Steve Kerr, Tony Kukoc. Steve Kerr, Tony Kukoc.
roles are 7 and 6 coming off the bench. Number 7, Magic Mike, who we just discussed with Channing Tatum. Unexpected film. On the surface, looks like sort of popcorn fun for the ladies and guys out there, but it's fun for everyone. I think it's a fun movie, a good cast, and worth a watch. And number 6, we went with Contagion. We thought one of his newer films, and really effective. And I could not touch any public surface for at least 3 weeks after I watched this movie. So for that matter alone, it's on the list.
Number 5.
Sex, Lies, and Videotape. We chose this one obviously for it being his beginning. This is the film that sort of catapulted him into being a writer-director. He won the Palme d'Or at Cannes, the youngest ever to win that. And even though a few films after this one didn't really work out, this film is sort of a visual business card to remember, because in every film it feels like he approaches it the same way he did this film, with that independent and artistic sensibility.
Number 4.
The Limey. There's not much more I could say about this film other than check it out. And this is a very well crafted film in terms of everything, but specifically the editing. You have to really pay attention to the editing. I think it's what propels this movie. It adds to the mix in terms of acting and directing and everything else. But if you haven't seen The Limey, definitely check it out.
Number 3.
Out of Sight. This is a great film. It's Soderbergh really joining together movie star, great story, and sort of the interesting dynamic between a heist or a complicated storyline, but with an ensemble cast. So George Clooney is great, J-Lo is great ensemble cast, supporting cast, and just an all-around great movie where I think Soderbergh turns into a big budget director that you can depend on, who also does indie movies.
Number 2.
Ocean's 11. If you haven't seen Ocean's 11, which I'm assuming there's not many people out there who haven't, it's worth a check out. It's a good convergence, similar to what Neal had said about Out of Sight, in terms of commercial appeal, artistic appeal. From beginning to end, you can't really say much more about this film than it's super fun. You're rooting for the team. It's an ensemble of people that you would normally see in any other movie. And Soderbergh, corrals all of their talents really well. And, like we've been mentioning before, brings a sort of, quote unquote, independent filmmaker sensibility to a big budget film that's super fun.
At number 1, the best of the best is
Traffic. Of course, this is what I believe is quintessential Steven Soderbergh, and we thought it definitely needs to be number 1. If you haven't seen any Soderbergh film and you start with something, Traffic should be it. Its subject matter is different than Ocean's 11, which is different than Erin Brockovich, which is different. But that's kind of the point we're making. So he can wear many different hats and put his lens to many different kinds of stories. And Traffic is one of the best films he's made. And one of the best films are really the 2000s. In fact, it's in 2000, so it kind of sparks off that whole era from 2000 to 2010. But yeah, there's not much more I can say about this movie. Don Cheadle, Benicio del Toro, Luis Guzman, Michael Douglas, Catherine Zeta-Jones. It's just great. It's a great ensemble. It takes some risk visually, and it's probably even more compelling now because the same war on drugs, quote unquote, is still occurring, and we're still going through probably a lot of the similar situations are in that film. So yeah, number 1 with a bullet for me is Traffic.
And we didn't include Erin Brockovich on this list. We like the movie. We think it's a strong movie, but we sort of figured in the scheme of things, Erin Brockovich and Traffic were in the same year. He was up for the exact same awards with both those films, and we just thought Traffic was the more superior film of those two, and kind of represents both of them. But we had to lean on Traffic on that one. So great director. This sort of ends our first batch of the director's series. These are sort of your early 90s into 2000s directors that we profiled.
Yep.
Next time we'll go maybe all 80s directors, maybe all 70s directors,
maybe key grips,
maybe Best Boys, anyone from the G&E department, really.
Yeah, any of your favorite rigging guys that you want to include in this list?
Any famous focus pullers. So this was fun. Hope you guys enjoyed it. If you'd like us to do some more directors, we will. We're going to kind of go back to our kooky.
Yeah, and we could do, and I know I was joking, but we could, we're open to doing another sort of trilogy or kind of 3-part series on on a particular another discipline, acting or
I'm just afraid of doing,
cinematographer.
of going to like Spielberg, Scorsese, that whole bunch, the Raging Bull bunch.
Yeah,
because there's so much we could talk
yeah,
about. I mean, that would
sure.
be like a 10-hour podcast.
For sure. But I think we could, maybe we can boil it down to cinematographer, do cinematographers, do some editors, do actors,
Yeah. We really appreciate you guys listening. Make sure to, send in some reviews on iTunes. We're looking to get some more, and we want to get to 25 to do our little prize that we'll send out. Keep spreading the word. We're just doing this for fun. We don't know how many of you are listening out there. Some of you have reached out and made your presence known, and I appreciate it. Jeffrey Seguritan, thanks for reaching out. I know you listen to the show and you enjoy it, and you've told a few people, and that's really the best way that we can spread the word. So I appreciate you doing that. And I told Mark about it, and he said thank you as well.
And once again, sorry for the technical issue with the David Fincher episode. We were really bummed about it. But if you got through it, you're a brave person, and we appreciate it. So thanks for listening.
Thanks, guys.
You like baseball? Claro. We need lights for the parks so kids can play at night. So it's safe. So they can play baseball. So they don't become burros para los malones. Everybody likes baseball. Everybody likes parks. Listen, I believe it's important that the United States take an interest in Tijuana now. That's what I'm talking about, my friends.
Thanks for listening. If you think we've missed any of your favorites, message us on Twitter and Instagram using the handle @bestofbestpod and include your own top 5 by using the hashtag BOTB. We ask that you rate, review, and subscribe to Best of the Best on iTunes or your preferred podcast app. Have ideas for show topics, opinions, or just want to say hello? Send us an email to bestofthebestpod@gmail.com. Till next time, special thanks to Radar Studios and long live Don Hogue.